The last thing we're going to look at during this lab is the internal aspect of the spinal cord and the functionality of that. And we're going to tie that into what we talked about in the very beginning about the somatic nervous system and how it works. So let's take a cross section of the spinal cord. I'm actually going to just come down here and draw it on kind of a bigger area. So if I were to draw my quick spinal cord, there we go. That's not very accurate, but we're going to just do that. And I were to take a cross section of that. So I take this little part right here. Right, so it's as if I cut it right there, and I am now looking from there. When I look at the spinal cord, a cross section of the spinal cord, it kind of looks like this. And then if we look at the inside of it, it has these horns that kind of go like this. Sort of looks like one of the flowers from SpongeBob SquarePants a little bit. And then what I'm going to draw is, I'm not going to draw it on both sides, but both sides are going to have nerves that are coming out of those, both in the front and the back. And so we call those our dorsal and ventral roots. We'll talk about that again in a second. But I'm just going to draw everything out now and then label what things are. So our nerves come out. Nerves come out. They come together. And then they go on their separate ways. Boop. Let me make this a little smaller. It's getting a little big over here. Here we go. Hello. Thank you. Okay. So this goes this way, this goes this way. Okay. So this is our kind of our general look of our spinal cord, of the cross section. Let me label a few parts of this. I'm going to label in black because I'm going to use colors to show our somatic nervous system in a second onto this image. So in the center of our, sorry, I saw that this is recording here and I was worried it was going to stop recording there. Okay, we're good. We're good. Okay. So right here, that is my ventral white commissure. This is going to be where I have the cerebrospinal fluid that are coming from those ventricles. We're going to have cerebrospinal fluid kind of in this area. So that's what we're seeing right there. I'm not going to label that part right now, but that's what that kind of center part is. So that's the very middle of our spinal cord. When we look on our kind of on either side here, we have our horns. This is going to be the back. So this is going to be our posterior or our dorsal aspect. And then this is going to be our front, which is going to be our anterior or our ventral aspect. I'm going to draw this as if this is the spinal cord at the level of, like, let's say C5. Okay, so this is a cervical level. When we're in the thoracic level, we add one more thing. I'll draw that out for you before we end, just to show you. But the one thing we add in the thoracic region is our sympathetic nervous system, which is part of our autonomic nervous system. And that is called the lateral horns. So essentially, I just add a horn here, and we add those horns when we're in the thoracic. But that's very complicated, and we're not going to talk about this sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system in lab. So don't worry about that right now. But that's where it would be located. So if you see that in lecture, that's where we're talking about. That's in the thoracic from levels T1 to L2. We have those lateral horns. But here we have a dorsal horn and a ventral horn. So this is my dorsal horn or our posterior horn. And this is our ventral horn. From my dorsal horn coming outside of that, we are going to have my root. So this is my dorsal root, and this is my ventral root. Now you see on this side, I don't have like this little ball. Here I do. This is because we have a special, our somatic cells, our sensory cells that come in. Their cell bodies or somas are found out here, outside in the peripheral nervous system, and that is going to be known as my dorsal root ganglion. The term ganglion literally just means cell bodies in a bunch. A cluster of cell bodies is a ganglion, and the ganglions are outside of the central nervous system. When they are within the central nervous system, they're known as nuclei. Why do they do that? I don't know. They just want to add more words. But ganglions are outside of the central nervous system, a group of cell bodies. That is what the dorsal root ganglion is. It's in the back on the dorsal root, and it's going to be made up of a bunch of cell bodies. I'll show you that in a second. From my dorsal root and my ventral root, they come together to create my spinal nerve. And then from my spinal nerve, I realized that it's okay. Don't be a perfectionist. From my spinal nerve, we then break out into my rami. So I have a dorsal rami. The dorsal rami is going to be sending things to our back. So our posterior, our back. So things like our not our trapezius because that's different, but things like our rhomboids and stuff like that are all going to come from dorsal rami. And then we have our ventral rami. So the rami come after the spinal nerve. The roots come before the spinal nerve. So those are our parts. Now let's talk about how they function and what they do. So we're going to go all the way back to that idea of someone holding a football in their hand. So he's holding this football in his hand. So here's my hand. Look at that fat hand. Okay, there's my hand. Now in my hand, I feel my football. So the information of feeling, what did I do for feeling? I don't remember what I did for the lobe, but I'm going to do feeling in blue. So I feel, so this is my feeling. I have receptors in my hand. Remember we talked about the Meissners, we talked about the Pacinian, right? Those were our feeling receptors, our free nerve endings. They were feeling, those touch receptors. So any of those receptors, I feel that ball in my hand. Information comes up through my ventral rami, through my spinal nerve, and into my dorsal horn. The cell bodies of that are here. So you can kind of see there's an axon on this side and an axon on that side. We call this, we call it a bipolar cell because it has two poles. It has two axons. Bipolar cells are what our sensory cells are within our peripheral nervous system. Anywho, that's more lecture ideas. But so I have my cell body again in that dorsal root ganglion. And so I'm going to have my information that comes from my hand that I'm touching. It comes and it synapses, or it sends the message to the cell bodies that are found within my dorsal horn. So in my dorsal horn, I have more cell bodies. So here's, whenever I draw a circle, that's a cell body. And that cell body is going to send that information up the spinal cord. It's going to go all the way up the spinal cord, all the way, if we're starting at C5. I should have done a different one if I'm going to do hand. Let me make this C8, and that's more accurate. That C8 would actually come in at that level. Not that you guys need something super duper accurate, but that just makes it more accurate. So information coming at C8, it comes all the way up my cervical spine, goes into my brainstem, goes medulla oblongata. Then it goes my pons, then it goes my midbrain, and then it goes to my thalamus. So it's going through my brainstem. It's going to go, and it's going to go to my thalamus. And then it's going to synapse in my thalamus. So it's going to go it just travels through my brainstem. It doesn't stop anywhere at my brainstem. Then it's going to synapse, meaning it's going to send the message to a cell body found in my thalamus. Remember that the thalamus is part of my diencephalon. It's my relay station. from my thalamus, it's going to send that information to my primary somatosensory cortex. And we remember that that primary somatosensory cortex is found within what lobe? I'll give you 2 seconds to answer. It's like Dora the Explorer. What lobe is the primary somatosensory cortex? Our parietal lobe, in that post-central gyrus. All right, our brain says, whoa, I feel the ball. Okay, from there, it now says I want to throw the ball. I don't want to feel it anymore. I want to throw it to my friend. So to do that, I'm now going to do pink. I'm going to switch over to pink. We have, from my primary motor cortex, where is the primary motor cortex? Right, that is in my frontal lobe within my precentral gyrus. We're going to leave that frontal lobe, and we're going to head on down through my brain, through all of those structures, continuing down through, continuing down through, and I come across, and I synapse at my ventral horn. From my ventral horn, I leave my ventral horn. So my cell body is found in my ventral horn. I come out of my ventral root. I go through my spinal nerve. I go back through my ventral rami to my hand, to the muscles of my hand and my arm that all say, throw that ball. And there is my motor. So in your workbook, you'll see that I kind of left space for you to draw your own cross-section like this. And then you'll see that I have these statements. These are going to be the exact statements on your quiz next week. Not all of them, but some of them. And we are just going to talk about what type of information do I have in what areas. So this is how we define it. So let's start with the first one, the ventral horn. So right here, the ventral horn. The ventral horn contains cell bodies. See how I have my circle here? So the ventral horn contains cell bodies for what color is it? For motor information. So my ventral horn has cell bodies for motor information. CB is cell bodies. All right, my dorsal horn is going to contain, we look right here, cell bodies for sensory information. My ventral root is going to contain, does it have any circles? No, it just has lines, so it's going to contain axons. For what color? What type of information? Motor information. My dorsal root is going to contain axons for sensory information. I'm doing this slow so that if maybe you're saying it out loud as I say this. Now, what we don't have in the ventral side is that dorsal root ganglion. The dorsal root ganglion, which is abbreviated a lot of the time as my DRG, it contains cell bodies of sensory information. And then my last one is my spinal nerve. And that contains axons or cell bodies, axons of what type of information? Sensory? Yes. Motor? Yes. So it's sensory and motor. Spinal nerves have both sensory and motor, whereas everything that said dorsal and everything that said ventral had one or the other except for our rami, which have both. But don't worry about rami. So it has axons for both sensory and motor information. And there you have it. So that is kind of the functionality. Now there is one other little thing that I did not mention, I think in the other videos, just because this is a little different than how I've done it before, where I usually kind of put everything together. So I kind of split it up more. The one thing that I didn't mention is that in the brain, so in my frontal and parietal lobes, that information affects the opposite side of the body. So I kind of drew these here, but what I should have done is brought these over a little bit, like over here, because there will be areas, and this is higher level neuroanatomy, so you guys don't have to worry about it, but you can see how there's kind of this crossover that happens. So if I were to draw this more accurately, there's actually a crossover that occurs to the other side of the brain. So when I was looking at, so if I said that this is my right side, if this is the right side of my body, this is my right hand, then this information is going to my left side of my brain, to my left frontal lobe, and to my left parietal lobe. So the left side of your brain affects the motor on the right, and the right side of the brain affects the left. So it's the opposite. So that's just one thing I didn't mention before. I wanted to make sure you guys understood that, because that is a common thing that is asked about the brain. And there you have it. That is the central nervous system. I hope you guys learned a lot in this online lab. I'm sorry we couldn't do it in person, but I really hope you enjoy your fall break. If you have any questions, please let me know. Don't forget to do your review. Look at the post-lab images. They're going to be taking these ideas of all the different structures, and you're just going to look at images of them and identify them. If you need help with those, let me know. You will have a lab quiz on this information next week at the beginning of lab. Have a wonderful break, travel safely, and I'll see you next week.